This tiny PC has a laptop AMD quad-core APU inside. This is clearly not a gaming device, but with the right low-spec magic, can we turn it into one? I have spent a considerable amount of time exploring AMD APUs, these little CPU and GPU combos that radically changed the entry-level PC space thanks to a combination of CPU and GPU technologies only possible by a company so heavily involved in both. Now, the desktop market for APUs has been a bit problematic lately, and that is a topic for another video, but what about the laptop space? AMD has been making such tremendous progress on their CPU technologies that nowadays it is hard to find any tech-related creator that is not ready to dismiss any gaming laptop as soon as they see it has an Intel CPU. I saw some of this myself recently. I looked into the new GPT Win3 handheld console on which the Chinese company GPT explicitly went back from Ryzen due to driver and support issues and instead went for a new Intel Xe integrated GPU, which I loved and continue to love. But it did not stop many of you on still thinking they should have gone AMD, which made me wonder, yeesh, are those entry-level AMD APUs that good? That is the question for today. Welcome to the LowSpecGamer, brought to you by Skillshare. I rarely get to cover laptop-related hardware because I just did not want to buy a full laptop for a video, and you can't just buy a laptop APU on its own without a full laptop. Kinda. Everything changed when I found this lovely little thing. This is the Asus PN50, a bare-bones kit featuring an entry-level laptop AMD APU. This features an entry-level Ryzen 3 4300U, 4 cores of Zen 2 CPU with no multi-threading and 5 vega GPU compute units on the integrated GPU. Yep, still vega. Technically, AMD is already up to the newest 5000 series for laptop APUs, but I can't find anything with those anywhere for the sake of comparison. And maybe it is the fact that this is technically one generation behind, but considering the prices of a lot of miniature PCs, similar to this one, I found this bare bones kit refurbished for way lower than I expected. And as I just said, this is sold often as a bare bones, which basically means this is a CPU plus GPU, motherboard and a power supply. For it to work, it still needs RAM, which is connected to this laptop's SODIMM slots, and a hard drive, either over SATA like a laptop SSD or an M.2 drive. Clearly, this is a device meant for office use as a thin client, a laptop without peripherals in a box, which explains the rather extensive port array for something so tiny. The question is, can it game? And I'm not talking about the lighter or highly optimized eSport titles everyone likes to test on these devices, which it can do very well. I want to find the limit of these entry-level APUs with some truly heavier games. Watch Dogs Legion has quickly turned into one of my favorite tests because of its benchmark tool, its flexible engine, its frankly magical resolution scaler, and the fact that it can be deceptively heavy. It is trapped in between the last gen and the next gen in consoles, and on PC it shows. This is the absolute lowest settings and the lowest allowed render resolution for 1080p. And while it did seem possible at times that the game will keep up a console like 30 FPS, it just gets overloaded and stutters badly. This is the part where most people not familiar with my channel will go, well, it is a cheap laptop quad-core APU, what did you expect? We are running into some of the inherent limitations of a device that was clearly meant for lighter use. For example, inside I have put 2 sticks of 2666 MHz RAM, which for some reason only operates at 2400 MHz with no option to change it on the BIOS whatsoever, meaning that this device always operates on stock timings. Given that integrated GPUs use RAM as VRAM, this means that there is always a bit of a memory bandwidth issue that we will have to deal with. Still, there are other places where improvements can be made. I somewhat recently did a video on this game about some secret settings you could change in the configuration file to force some things even lower, particularly geometry quality to force lower detail models much closer to the camera and a slightly lower render resolution, still lower than what the menu in the game allows. This makes a huge difference to the point that I think I could raise the resolution again and aim for a more legible, stable 30 FPS. But before I even consider locking anything, I wanted to try one more thing. TDP, or the maximum heat allowed to dissipate from a chip, is a big deal for this sort of device. One thing people often fail to look into when looking at laptop hardware instead of desktop hardware is that TDP matters a lot. Lower TDPs mean thinner devices that require less cooling and have a longer battery life, but compared to their non-mobile counterparts, their limits on performance is not really how fast the CPU and GPU are, but how much heat they're allowed to output. This is one of the main reasons why Apple started migrating to their own chips in laptops. Their stuff just works significantly better in lower TDPs than Intel or AMD CPUs, and why GPT handheld computers have invested so much in better and better cooling, so you can use higher and higher TDPs for more gaming performance. Now, this comes into play because of a little program called Renoir Mobile Tuning, an application designed for easily changing some of the parameters that control the power and heat limits of a device. I had the privilege of having spoken with the author of this program.
You would probably want to know how it works in order to understand how I figured it out. So on a very base level, the easiest way is that there's mailboxes that essentially have like 3 registers that you can use to communicate with a part of the processor called the system management unit. It's an entire coprocessor that manages all the power, all the clocks, all the monitoring on the processor, and it's an incredible little coprocessor when you actually get into it, because it does all these features behind the scenes and you have no idea what's going on with it unless if you actually dig into it and take a look at it.
And I will post the full interview in the extended cut of this video, but while the author made it very clear that this sort of tweaking does work best in more expensive higher-end laptop APUs, which can result to as much as a 20% increase in performance on higher TDPs. On our 4300U cheaper mini PC, the effect is going to be slighter. Still, it made a measurable, observable difference, and the little fan of this thing, while a little bit louder, is able to keep up. I might have voided the guarantee, but considering that this is a product that was already used and I got it refurbished, this was a pretty excellent choice. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. If there's a modern open world game that I feel was not meant for this tiny PC, it's probably this one. On the lowest settings allowed by the game at 1080p, but with a 50% resolution scaler and stock power settings, it surprisingly almost could consistently lock at 30 FPS. Given the GPU bottleneck, I could probably just lower the resolution scale further, but compared to Watch Dogs and its just fantastic reconstruction, the lower resolution here leaves a lot to be desired. So I simply bumped the TDP on the tool I showed you before, which boosted average by a couple of measurable frames, just enough to ensure a possible 30 FPS lock without reducing the resolution. Finally, I just really wanted to give one more heavy game a chance: Control. Control is an excellent test for this sort of machine for a variety of reasons. It can render at a lower resolution and reconstruct the image back at a higher one in ways that are honestly almost as good as whatever the heck Watch Dogs Legions is doing. And finally, it can be unexpectedly GPU heavy, especially during combat. Last generation consoles were known to struggle a fair bit to lock to 30 FPS, and even on the lowest settings and a reduced render resolution, this little PC was playable, but well, some of these drops under 30 FPS can be quite painful. Two things here. I always complain that the display options in this game for lower render resolutions are always suspiciously limited, but as I explained on its own video, this can easily be customizable on this configuration file, which I cut down just a bit to 720p, which is barely noticeable. That, along with the added benefit of the TDP boost, now means that if the FPS drops, it at worst gets to 29, which is just perfect and rather good experience for this fantastic game. In general, the results are much better than I expected. Last time I tested a laptop AMD APU a million years ago, I was annoyed by the unpredictable performance and old drivers. Jump just years into the future, and AMD laptop APUs feature the same drivers as their big desktop counterparts, and thanks to tools like Renoir Mobile Tuner, surprisingly flexible performance is possible, all leading to the possibility of adorable, relatively cheaper tiny PCs like this one, that when taken out of their usual office use can make for a surprisingly capable makeshift gaming device with a tremendously extensive library. So, should you buy one to put on your TV now? I'm not sure you should when there are other interesting options for it that I plan to explore very soon, but for those wanting to experiment with mini devices relatively cheaply, and more likely people getting laptops with this for general use, the future is looking interesting. I am at least very happy that there are new AMD options for miniature PCs out there when the desktop market keeps failing us. We will see how it looks for the new generation. Now, I had to use a number of tricks to get games to work here satisfactorily, and I explored those with more detail on each game-specific video. However, one of the most common questions I get over social media is just how I do research for any of these things. The other common question has to do with production values. I am very glad that so many of you have noticed the extra effort that is being put into the production of these videos, and many wondered what efforts actually I have been doing to improve them. The answer has to do with Skillshare, this video sponsor, as I have been putting away some time every week just for learning skills like color grading, just to make these videos feel better. In fact, I have started work on my own Skillshare class where I will explain the general process and knowledge required to tweak a game to customize its graphics, and that summarizes very well my very own process when working on every video. This has been something that has been highly requested in one form or another, and I'm glad I finally started working on it. But why Skillshare? Simply put, Skillshare is the internet community for learners and creative, with thousands of deluxe inspiring classes on creative topics. Classes which adapt to any schedule. Something I really like, especially because I can always find a class that fits whatever time I have. Now the good news is that if you want to catch my class later next month, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership, so you can get just in time and start improving your own craft today. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and you for watching.